I'm about to tell you something that will sound completely insane. Something that contradicts everything your parents taught you, everything society tells you, everything that feels logical and safe. Stop looking for a job. I know what you're thinking. Rabbi, have you lost your mind? I have bills to pay, I have rent due, I have a family to feed, I can't just stop looking for work. But here's what nobody tells you. The very act of job hunting, of desperately scanning listings, of sending out resume after resume, of positioning yourself as someone who needs to be chosen, this entire process is actually repelling money from your life. I'm Rabbi Shimon. I'm 83 years old. I've watched thousands of people struggle with this exact problem over the decades, and I've discovered something that the Torah has been teaching for thousands of years, but that modern society has completely forgotten. Money doesn't come to people who chase it. Money comes to people who create value. Let me tell you about a young man I met 15 years ago. His name was David, 27 years old, master's degree in engineering, couldn't find work for 8 months. He was sending out 30 applications a week, customizing cover letters, doing everything the career counselors told him to do, nothing, rejection after rejection. The few interviews he got went nowhere. He came to me frustrated, broke, living in his parents' basement, feeling like a complete failure. And I told him the same thing I'm telling you now: stop looking for a job. He thought I was crazy. He said, "Rabbi, I need money. How do I get money if I'm not looking for work?" And I said, "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how do you get money. The question is how do you create value that naturally attracts money." I had him do something that seemed absurd. I told him to stop sending applications entirely. Instead, I had him spend 2 weeks just observing problems, observing what frustrated people, observing what people complained about, observing what people wished existed but didn't. He came back and told me about something he'd noticed. His father, who was a contractor, was constantly frustrated with the software available for managing construction projects. Everything was too complicated, too expensive, or didn't do what contractors actually needed. I said, "So build something better." He said, "Rabbi, I'm not a software developer. I'm a mechanical engineer." I said, "You can learn, you can teach yourself, you can build a simple prototype. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to solve the problem." David spent the next 3 months teaching himself basic programming, built a rough prototype of project management software specifically for small contractors. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't polished, but it worked. It solved real problems that his father and his father's colleagues were actually having. He gave it to 5 contractors for free, asked them to test it, tell him what worked and what didn't. They loved it. They started telling other contractors about it. Within 6 months, he had 40 paying customers. Within a year, he had 200. Within 2 years, he sold that company for more money than he would have made in a decade at the engineering job he was trying to get. But here's what's important. David didn't succeed because he had some brilliant idea. He succeeded because he stopped positioning himself as someone who needed to be chosen and started positioning himself as someone who solves problems. That shift changes everything. When you're job hunting, you're in a posture of lack. You're essentially saying, "Please pick me, please give me money, please validate that I'm worthy of earning a living." And that energy, that desperation, people can feel it, employers can sense it, and it repels them. But when you're creating value, when you're solving real problems, when you're focused on contribution instead of compensation, everything shifts. You're no longer asking, you're offering. You're not begging for opportunity, you're creating opportunity. The Torah teaches this principle clearly. It says, 6 days you shall work and do all your labor, not 6 days you shall look for work, not 6 days you shall hope someone hires you. 6 days you shall work, you shall create, you shall produce, you shall contribute. The assumption is that you're already working, already creating, already adding value to the world. And when you operate from that place, provision flows naturally. I see the same pattern destroy people over and over. They graduate from university, they start job hunting, Months pass, rejections pile up, their confidence erodes, their savings deplete, they get desperate, and desperation makes them even less attractive to employers. It becomes a vicious cycle. Meanwhile, there are people with fewer credentials, less impressive resumes, who never struggle to find work or generate income. Why? Because they're not looking for jobs. They're looking for problems to solve. They're looking for value to create. They're looking for ways to make themselves useful. And usefulness always gets rewarded. Always. It's a law as reliable as gravity. Let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying don't work. I'm not saying sit around waiting for money to magically appear while you do nothing. I'm not promoting some lazy, entitled mindset where you expect provision without contribution. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying contribute so much value that money chases you instead of you chasing money. Here's how this actually works practically. You start by identifying what you're capable of doing right now, today, with the skills and resources you currently possess, not what you wish you could do, not what you'll be able to do someday after you get trained or certified or hired. What can you do right now? Can you write clearly? Can you organize information? Can you solve technical problems? Can you design things? Can you teach people? Can you build things? Can you connect people who need to know each other? Can you simplify complicated processes? Everyone, and I mean everyone, has skills that other people need. The question is whether you're positioning those skills as something you're trying to get hired to do, or whether you're positioning those skills as value you're actively creating. Next, you identify problems that people are actually willing to pay to solve, not problems you think they should care about, not problems that seem important to you, problems they're actively frustrated by, problems that cost them time, money, energy, or peace. How do you find these problems? You ask, you listen, you observe, you pay attention to what people complain about, you notice what wastes people's time, you identify inefficiencies, frustrations, gaps between what exists and what people actually need. This doesn't require market research or focus groups. It requires paying attention to the world around you. Then you solve one of those problems, not all of them, not perfectly, just one problem for one person or one group of people. You create something, build something, offer something that makes their life measurably better. And here's the key: you don't wait for permission, you don't wait for funding, you don't wait until conditions are perfect. You start with what you have, where you are right now. Maybe you build a simple tool that saves people time. Maybe you create a resource that organizes information they need. Maybe you offer a service that eliminates a frustration. Maybe you connect people who need each other. Maybe you teach something you know that others need to learn. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is that you're creating value, not seeking validation. When you do this, when you genuinely solve problems for people, three things happen naturally. First, people talk. They tell others about what you created. They refer people to you. Word spreads organically because people love sharing solutions to their problems. Second, people pay. When something genuinely makes their life better, people want to support it. They want to ensure it continues existing. They're willing to exchange money for the value they're receiving. Third, opportunities appear. When you're known as someone who solves problems, people start bringing you problems. They start asking if you can help with other issues. They start connecting you with people who need what you offer. None of this requires you to have a job. None of this requires someone to choose you. None of this requires you to compete against hundreds of other applicants for a position that may or may not actually utilize your capabilities. I watched this principle transform my own son's life. He graduated with a degree in business, couldn't find work during a recession, sent out applications for months. Nothing. He was getting depressed, questioning his worth, wondering if he'd wasted years and money on education that led nowhere. I told him the same thing: stop looking for a job, start creating value. He loved coffee, spent hours in coffee shops. He noticed that most coffee shops had terrible Wi-Fi, uncomfortable seating, or weren't actually conducive to people working there despite marketing themselves as work-friendly spaces. So he started visiting coffee shops, documenting what worked and what didn't, what made them genuinely useful for people trying to work versus what was just aesthetic. He created a simple rating system and published reviews online. Coffee shop owners started reading his reviews. Some were defensive, but many were curious. They wanted to know what they could improve. They wanted to understand why some shops became beloved workspaces while others stayed empty. My son started offering consulting, helping coffee shops optimize their spaces for people working remotely. Nothing fancy, just practical changes to layout, seating, outlets, Wi-Fi, lighting. He charged modest fees. Within 6 months, he was making more than the entry-level business jobs he'd been applying for. Within a year, he'd expanded to consulting for co-working spaces and libraries. Within 2 years, he'd written a book about designing productive public spaces that became required reading in urban planning courses. He never got hired, he never needed to. He created value and money appeared. This is what I mean when I say stop looking for a job. I don't mean become passive. I mean become active in a completely different way. Stop positioning yourself as someone waiting to be chosen. Start positioning yourself as someone who chooses what problems to solve. The shift is subtle but profound. It's the difference between, will someone please hire me to do marketing, and I help small businesses clarify their message so they attract better customers. The first is begging, the second is offering. The first is hoping someone will validate your worth. The second is demonstrating your worth. The first makes you dependent on someone else's decision. The second makes you dependent on your own initiative. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Rabbi, this sounds great for people with certain skills or in certain fields, but I'm in a situation where I really do need a traditional job. I can't just become an entrepreneur overnight. And I understand that. I'm not saying everyone needs to start a business. I'm not saying traditional employment is wrong or inferior. But even if you need a traditional job, the principle still applies. The people who get hired fastest and get the best positions aren't the ones desperately applying to everything. They're the ones who have already been creating value in some form. They've been writing about their field. They've been building projects. They've been contributing to open source. They've been helping people solve problems for free. They've been teaching what they know. They've been building a body of work that demonstrates their capability. When those people apply for positions, they're not asking to be given a chance. They're showing what they've already done. They're demonstrating proven value, and that makes them infinitely more attractive than someone with the same credentials who's just been waiting for someone to hire them. The Torah has another teaching that applies here. It says, "In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." This is usually interpreted as a curse, a punishment for sin, but I read it differently. Sweat doesn't come from hopping, sweat doesn't come from wishing, sweat doesn't come from applying, sweat comes from working, from creating, from building, from producing. The verse is actually a promise. When you're actually working, when you're actually sweating, when you're actually creating value through real effort, provision comes, not might come, not could come, will come. That's the design. But if you're just sending applications, just waiting for interviews, just hoping someone notices you, you're not sweating, you're not working in the biblical sense, you're just hopping. And hope without work is not faith, it's passivity disguised as patience. I've seen too many brilliant people waste years in this passive state, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to recognize their potential, waiting for their break. Meanwhile, less talented people who simply started creating value, who started solving problems, who started building things, they're thriving. Not because they're better, because they're active instead of passive. So here's what I want you to do. If you're currently in that cycle of job hunting, of applications and rejections and waiting, I want you to try something different for 30 days. For the next 30 days, stop applying to jobs, not forever, just 30 days. Instead, spend that time creating value. Identify one problem you can solve, one thing you can build, one way you can help people, and do it. Don't wait for permission, don't wait for funding, don't wait for perfect conditions. Just create something of value. Maybe you create content that teaches something useful. Maybe you build a simple tool. Maybe you offer a service for free to get testimonials. Maybe you solve a problem for a local business. Maybe you connect people who need to know each other. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is that you shift from seeking to offering, from asking to giving, from hoping someone will choose you to demonstrating why people should want what you create. And watch what happens. Watch how the energy shifts. Watch how people respond differently. Watch how opportunities start appearing that weren't there when you were just applying to postings. This isn't magic. This is how value operates in the world. Value attracts resources, always, reliably, predictably. You don't need to be chosen. You need to create something worth choosing. You don't need someone to give you an opportunity. You need to create opportunities through the value you offer. You don't need to convince someone you're worthy of a salary. You need to demonstrate that what you create is worth paying for. When you make that shift, when you move from job seeker to value creator, everything changes. Not immediately, not magically, but inevitably. Money appears, not because you chased it, because you created something worth exchanging money for. Your soul is the blueprint. Your life is the construction. Shalom, my friend. Now stop looking for a job and start creating value.